we are live now. So if you had me on a countdown page, I should be all up on your screen. If you can hear me and you can see me okay, please let me know. If this is your first live chat, thank you so much for joining live. For all of you, thank you for joining live. It's always so much nicer when I can connect with you, whether through the comments or just knowing I'm not sitting here talking to myself like a crazy person, which I do talk to myself quite a bit even on a regular day. But if you can hear me and see okay, there is a chat box for anyone new. I believe over here, I think I'm mirrored on my screen. So the chat box is there for you to comment, ask your questions, anything that comes up for you during the chat. This is kind of why I moved to this platform versus Google Hangouts or anything like that. It just lets me chat with you real time. So there's no delay. You're hearing and seeing me as I'm speaking in my office/bedroom. And then this chat box allows us to have an interaction. So to chat and get your questions answered. And if you have any input or experiences you want to share, please do. And I usually like to take some time and pause during the chat to read those if anything comes up. So, and then again, if you're tuning in for the replay, you always know that you can find me for questions in our Facebook group, where if you're watching this and it's not live, whatever comes up for you, you can tag me there, and I'm always kind of hanging out in there virtually. So today we're talking all about how to take better photos. So I get this question so much. And so I thought it would be good to do a kind of live chat / live training on this. So it will be discussion, it will be questions if you have them that will be answered, but it is going to be more of a training tips and tricks and strategies chat, because I want to share this with you, mostly because I work as a designer. So if you don't know me, I'm a brand stylist and a graphic and web designer, as well as a yoga teacher. So when I'm working on websites and brand stuff for my clients, a lot of the time, design and photography go very much hand in hand. So I can design a really great website, I can design, a really nice postcard, these types of things. But if you don't have good quality imagery, or your imagery is really dark or grainy or blurry, or just, maybe like a selfie in your living room, that on a really outstanding website is going to stand out like a sore thumb. And that's not meant to be in a good way. It's not a good standout. It's a standout like this person hasn't put very much effort into making things captivating. And so what I do and what photographers do, we work very closely together. And I've worked with lots of photographers with my clients to get a right style, get the right vibe for their photos, and that kind of thing. So it really does go hand in hand. When we're building out these things, we're building websites, brands, material for our marketing, good imagery is going to be the captivator. So I always like to say this: imagery is the captivator, text is the information. So imagery is what someone lands on. Imagery is something that captivates someone initially. It brings someone in to want to explore further. So it's important. It's important in what we put out there, especially with social media these days. Of course, with social media, imagery is kind of everything for those platforms. So I want to talk today about how we can start to take better photos. Tips for what kind of content we should be looking at for our photography or our imagery. Where you can find stock photos if you don't necessarily want to have a picture of you on every single thing you use, which is totally understandable. What you can use to edit some of your images and what you can focus on, what parts of editing tools and software you can use to just get a really great kind of edits right off the bat, and some editing tips and tricks. So I've got a lot to cover. It might go a little bit over half an hour just because I do want to share all of this. It's just, I think it's really valuable. And I just think it's good to have strategies for taking better photos yourself for when you don't have a budget to hire a photographer. And you can tell, right? Like I'm sure you've had experiences in the past where imagery has been less than captivating, I should say. So you land on a website and there's just like really grainy or low quality imagery. Maybe you land on a website, not even just for yoga, for any kind of business, where it's super cheesy stock photography. And I know you know what I'm talking about, the like, how do you get your teeth so white pictures and the over like smiling, and like, I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. I'm sure you've seen it. And it's harder to connect with something like that. It's harder to be like thrilled when you land on something, or be really engaged in something when you're just like, oh, what, like, why did they pick that picture? So it is important. It's not the be all to end all, but it is important for us to start thinking about how we can use better imagery in our branding and our marketing and our websites and things like that, especially as yoga teachers, because when we get to the content part, I'll talk briefly about sort of what you want to show and things you can show or things you should think about showing that speak to your brand, to speak to who you are as a teacher. So let's dive in. So obviously it's most optimal to be able to hire a photographer. Right off the bat, it's what I would say about a designer too. If you have money that you can allocate to that, and that's somewhere you can invest, it's a really, really good investment. I actually had my first professional, like, intense photo shoot this past fall. And all my images before that I'd taken myself, because I have a pretty good camera. I've got, aside from my iPhone, I have a mirrorless camera, it's called. It's basically DSLR quality. So I'd taken all of my pictures myself, or had someone I know, like a sister or a friend or my partner, take photos for me. And that has worked really well. But having a professional photo shoot done was beyond what I would be capable of doing for myself. And it is worth the investment if that's something that's on the plate for you. Because a good photographer can take your brand, take your vision, take your vibe, and understand who you are as a yoga teacher. They can take that and translate it into both a shot list, so a list of things that would be helpful for you to have. So sometimes it's nice to go into a photo shoot with having your own shot list made up. When I went into mine, I had a list of things I definitely knew I needed to get pictures of, like me working at my desk, me doing some yoga poses or meditative poses, a couple of shots of just my laptop so I could impose and put Photoshop different websites on it to showcase some of my work. So I had a list of things I knew I wanted, but the photographer is really great at filling in the gaps and saying, you know what, they art direct the shoot. So it really is helpful. And the editing, all of it is just beyond the quality I'd be able to do for myself. So number one, first and foremost, of course, I believe in investing in a professional photography shoot when that's something that's on the table for you. If it's not, however, just like I did for the first 2 years of my business, you can do things yourself and you can do them with pretty good quality. So I want to dive into kind of the training, so to speak, now with some tips and tricks. We're going to start off with some tips and tricks and strategies for taking your own photos. And these days, everybody basically, mostly for the most part, has a really good quality camera with them in their phone. So this little guy here is really handy. It has great quality, good megapixels. It can do very powerful things. Of course, it's not up to par with like a DSLR camera, or I think the iPhone 7 does have like some sort of depth perception that you can mess around with now, which my webcam just kind of did. You saw there, that was just great timing. But you can take really good pictures still with that phone. I never suggest that you use an iPhone or a smartphone for like really good quality things, or if you're putting a lot of money, like if someone's putting a lot of money behind a web design project with me and they're a big company, I would go for the big stuff. I would find a friend that has a DSLR, or get your hands on a good camera. And lots of places in towns or cities rent equipment. So you can batch your photography and rent for a day or a weekend and get some of this stuff done. So I'll get more into that in a second. But first and foremost, let's get into some tips and tricks for how to make your photos appear better and higher quality if you are using something like a smartphone or a decent-ish camera. So number one is, my first tip is to invest in a tripod. So tripods, if you go on like Amazon, or you go online, or you go into your local photography store, a tripod is phenomenal for reducing blur, it keeps your camera very still. So particularly if you're going to be doing videos, obviously a tripod would be wonderful because it's held up for you and you don't have to worry about it. So you can actually even buy tripods for, get all my notifications there, for your phone that screws into something, or it's a case that you can put on it that actually is a tripod for your phone, which is amazing. And when your camera can stay like incredibly still, it allows more light to be brought in without it being blurry. So it's a really good investment if you are going to be using something like your phone or a camera to take photos of you from afar, or videos particularly. So definitely, it also kind of helps with that selfie syndrome. So you don't have to hold your phone or your camera in your hand. So, and especially with our timers now on our phones, I think you can go up to 10 seconds. But there's another cool thing where you can invest in a tripod and a remote shutter control for your phone. So you can hold it in your hand while you're kind of back, set yourself up, and then take the pictures with pressing a button or setting a longer timer. So lots of options for accessories for your phone if that's the route that you have, if that's what's available to you. You can definitely invest in some cheap accessories that will help bring that to life and bring a bit more of a higher quality approach to a smartphone camera. Number 2 is invest in some lighting. So there's so much. You can also do this at your local camera store. You can rent equipment. We've got tons here in the city where you can just rent it for a day. And between lighting and I would say if you're going to rent like a light or a camera or a tripod, like it would probably be under $100 for the weekend here where I am. I don't know about your stores, but yeah, it's totally worth checking out lighting boxes. You can also order pretty affordable ones online if this is something you want to be doing on an ongoing basis. And you want like soft lighting boxes, nothing too harsh. So I can show you what I have. I have these video LED lights, and I've got light stands and everything set up for them just for the courses I record. But this is one of them, and then this basically screws into a stand. But it turns on. I'll try not to like blind you. Let's see. The battery might be dead. Oh, no. So you can like adjust the brightness, which is like, ooh, super bright. And you can also turn it down a bit. You can also adjust the warmth. So this is like super warm, which is not appealing to me too much, but I usually go for more of like the white light, which you can even see on my face. Like you can see the difference of, and I'm not even pointing it at myself, of warmth and light. So these aren't too expensive. And to avoid like the harshness of a light, the other kind of little cheap workaround that I have is using foam board to get back in there. Using foam board, like a white piece of Bristol board or foam board, to reflect the light. So you would basically shine the light at the foam board, and then it would bounce back just really softly onto you or onto your subject, whatever you're taking pictures of. So super cheap workaround. You also can get like reflectors if you want to go fancy. But there's lots of lighting options available to you if you do need a little bit of a boost. So if you're not in a space or you don't live somewhere where there's lots of natural light, that might be a really good option to up that quality of your photos incredibly. Because when we can bring more light into an image, especially with like a smartphone or a not super expensive camera, the more light you can let into the lens, the less blurry and less grainy your photos will be. So it really, really ups the quality. I'm pretty lucky because I have this massive floor to ceiling window behind me. So when I'm in here during peak daylight hours, it's really great lighting. Like I have my bedroom light on, but it's like barely doing anything right now. I should probably turn it off. So that's kind of tip number 2. So 1, tripod and accessories, maybe a remote control shutter and lighting. Pretty cheap options to have available, especially if you rent them, but if you want to purchase them, it's still cheaper to have on an ongoing basis than hiring a photographer every time you need new high quality photos done. Number 3 is obviously pretty simple. Have someone help you take the pictures. And I know often we might think of something kind of on a whim, and to call someone up and come help us is not always available or readily available. But if you can batch your sessions and your photography together, like sometimes my sister and I will plan a day or like an afternoon where we will just spend time taking some pictures that we need of each other. And it just helps to have someone controlling the camera, have someone controlling the light or directing kind of, what they're seeing. And although it might not be a photographer, it's always just like, it's just nicer to have help sometimes. But again, I know this isn't always an option, and it's not always an option for me. There's lots of times I'm like, crap, I really wish I had a photo of this for this purpose, a blog post or to share on Instagram, these types of things. Sometimes it just has to be on a whim. So you need to kind of improvise. But if you can have a friend, especially if you have a friend, make friends with people with good cameras. And if you have a friend with a good camera, take them out for lunch or something and ask them if they can spend some time with you, or they can lend you their camera that you can use. Lots of options. So I'm sure that we have some people that don't mind helping us out for a good imagery cause. Number 4, take your photos during natural daylight hours. So if you have a point in your day, and I know some of us work during the day, and I know some of us, like for me, for a while when I was in my business, I was working 9 to 5. And so especially in the winter, there was 0 daylight hours for me to be taking pictures of myself in my element or, where I wanted to be taking them. So that's not always an option. That's where that artificial lighting might be really handy for you. But if you can manage to take your pictures during natural daylight, nothing will beat natural daylight. That's just it. Like, this is natural daylight for me, and it's actually, it's like pretty gloomy outside right now, and this is what it looks like. And just nothing will beat that quality of lighting in your images. So if that's ever an option, pictures outside are wonderful, and pictures inside are great during peak daylight hours. So that being said, a kind of sub point to this, this number, what are we on? We're on number 4. So the sub point to this is that if you can find a north facing window, you're just like prime. Like, I think I know photographers who have bought houses based on north facing windows, or people have bought, literally, I'm being serious, have bought places for photographs for north facing windows. And that's exactly what this window is. And the reason north facing windows are so good is that you don't have that time of day where the sun is just like beaming in. So if I was not facing north and I was facing east or west, basically I would be getting, at some point in the day, the sun coming in the window. Here, the sun kind of goes up and down, and it's just, between certain hours of the day, it's just bright. It's just really perfect photography light. And so if you have somewhere, if you're looking even for like a location to shoot at, those kinds of lighting situations are prime. Again, we can't all be so lucky. That's where this artificial kind of lighting boxes and things like that, these softeners and reflectors come in to help create that vibe without the north-facing window or the daylight. So those are kind of some good tips about using natural daylight and artificial light. If you are inside, the one other kind of sub point to this that I have is that right now I have an artificial light on. I have my bedroom office light on, and that light is super warm, and it will, when I take photos, say for my Instagram account or things like that, 90% of, maybe like 80% of the time, I take those photos with my iPhone because I want to take pictures that are authentically in the moment. I have a library of photos that I use for when it's not the case, but I will turn my artificial light, my house light, off because it creates a really, really warm light that is hard to get rid of in the editing phase. So anytime you can use natural white light, perfect. And specifically, I'll turn this light off so that it's a little bit, you can always add warmth to your images, and it's much easier than taking warmth away. So there's a clear, distinct difference that between when my light is off and when it's on, even when it's just barely doing something, there's a difference. So if you have that really great natural light, turn your other artificial lights off, and it will make a big difference for the editing phase. So moving on, the next tip is for batching your photos. So this is with your iPhone or with your camera. Again, we're still on this tips and tricks for those. Batch your time for your photography. And I've already mentioned this in a couple of the points before this, but batch your time for when you're taking photos. Take your photos all together, maybe not all on one day, but take quite a few so that you have a library, and so that when that light is really good, you are taking multiple pictures. And it might mean, and I've done this many times myself before, it might mean you're changing outfits, and it might mean you're kind of like faking it a little bit on it being different days. But I'll change my outfits and I'll take a bunch of my photos in one location or one scene, batch them all together. It just makes it way easier. And then you end up with this library of pictures that you can choose from for when you, one, are posting on social media and don't have an in-the-moment picture to share, or two, when you need some library to refer to for blog posts or for your website or for marketing materials. If someone asks you if you have hey, do you have a photo of you doing this for, say you're on a podcast or whatever, you've got a library set up. So batch your sessions together. That way you're setting up once, that way you're cleaning up once, your lighting, if you do have lighting, is only being set up once, and you can just kind of boom, 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 get some good shots in. So those are sort of my overall tips and tricks for using your iPhone specifically, or like a decent camera. And really the base of it is get some really solid accessories, lighting, tripods, remote controls, and use natural light whenever you can. And that's kind of the gist of it. The more light, the better your photos will turn out. You don't want to overdo it. If I had like, let me show you again here. You don't want to like this to happen. That's awful. Showed you all of my flaws on my bright light. You don't want to overdo the exposure because that's also very difficult to edit later. But I'm just meaning that the more natural and the more light you can have in your image, the less blurry, the less grainy, the higher quality the photo will turn out. Okay, so let's move on to some tips for your content. So I know a ton of questions I get all the time. What can I be taking pictures of? What do I post on social media? What do you need pictures of for my website? And we do want lots of, if we're our brand, we need to be showcasing that. It needs to be us connecting with our audience. But a lot of people, and I don't disagree, don't want to be this up front and center in all of their pictures, you know, like doing all of your poses, just like head on me, this is all the pictures across your website. That's not super ideal. So what kind of content can you use or start thinking of to mix it up, to create engagement without being, bam, this is all me? So what I like to say is take some photos of you. One, you want especially for like a website or for if you're doing anything in the online space, you need kind of a headshot. Some sort of picture where if you were posting on a blog or you were submitting a yoga teaching video to a platform, they're going to want some kind of headshot of you. So that doesn't necessarily mean you're like smiling against a white wall. You can be doing, like, there's lots of things. One of my headshots is me at my desk, you know, like in my element and in my zone. Or another one you can have is just a yoga simple pose, but you want to be able to see like you and your face. So, you know, standard headshot is always a good piece of content to have. But then mix that up with other shots of, you can do poses. So sometimes it's nice to have a range of different poses taken of you, either in the same scenario, same context, same location, or again, creating that library where maybe you're wearing different outfits for different things, or maybe you're in a different setting, or whatever the purpose of these images, whatever you're going to use them for. But having poses, and then there's a whole other side to things where you can start to get kind of vague and a little bit more obscure with your photos, where maybe you have some photos if you do mantras in your sequences, or you can have like close-ups of just the mantra. So you're sort of like in it, but not really. Maybe it's just your feet on your mat. Maybe it's just like one piece of your body in the pose. And these kinds of things can be really good for when you just need something a little bit more obscure that's not you. Again, for example, I'm just trying to put these into context for you, but like for blog posts or like header images or postcards or posters for a retreat that you have coming up, whatever the case may be, some obscure and vague photos are handy to have in your library. And then even still, you can get more vague or a little bit more obscure with props. You can take pictures of props, or even in the case of yoga teachers, like a lot of outside imagery, if that's something that runs, like that's the vibe of your brand. There's tons of like outdoor imagery you can have. Pictures of you from like further away where like it's maybe you behind your shoulder, or it's just the back where it's not kind of very blatantly, this is like me doing a pose. Those are all really good to have in your library of images, because just for coming up with things that you can refer to really quickly for, again, like postcards, websites, banners, ads, anything that you need to kind of run with for marketing or whatever you're using them for, it's good to have a library to choose from. When you are thinking about the content and when you're kind of positioning the layout of your image, a couple of other really handy ones to have in your library are pictures where there's lots of negative space. So you might be outside, or you might be in your studio or in a room, and you don't need to take all of your pictures like this, but it is nice to have some photos where there's lots of negative space behind you or around you. The reason being is you might want to have instances where you're going to put text overlay on top of an image. Think about like an Instagram quote or a postcard where you might have some writing, or you need to put your logo there. So what that means is it might be outside where there's lots of greenery, but there's not a ton going on. There's not lots of detail. So it might just be like green trees behind me here, but it's all pretty solid one color negative space so that I could put like white text on top of it. So take some images where you've got that space to work with, and there's so many just different ways. I've got a few that I have in my library of like just mantras with some white space beside me, legs up the wall just, you know, here, and then there's all this white space here. So think of some of the ways you might be using these in the future where you might want to put text. Maybe there's like white space on top and you're like down here somewhere. Just white space, negative space. White space, I'm saying, not meaning exactly white. It might be a brick wall that's behind me and it's just very solid and I can put text over top. So something to think about for your content. Another little tiny secret tip and trick, those foam boards I was talking about for reflecting the light, you can also use those for flat lays. So if you want to do something like a yoga mat with some props, just put your foam board underneath. The yoga mat edge comes to the foam board with some props, and then you take it from the top. And it just looks like a white background or a white floor. So you can use all different colors of foam board to take those like kind of flat lay background. You can also put it as a backdrop to something and take a picture close up. So you kind of like fake the context around it a little bit. And photographers do this all the time as well with like brand imagery and all those flat lays that you probably see on Instagram and things like that. They're very popular right now, and there's probably only some instances that it would come into play for someone like us as yoga teachers, but there might be instances where you need some white space and just like a prop or something, and that's a really good way to do it. So foam boards are your friend. So those are kind of my tips for content. And I do want to now get into stock photos. So I'm going to give you a few resources and tips for finding stock photos for when we, one, might not be able to take photos of ourselves. Maybe we just don't have the gear or the time, but we really need a good photo for something kind of like instantly. There's stock photos, and stock photos don't have to be those overly cheesy, super white teeth, standard stereotypical pictures. They don't have to be that. They don't need to be that. They shouldn't be that. They're just, some of them are just very cringy, and they're not going to work to communicate your brand if that's something that's not your brand. So we need to be careful about the content that we're sharing and things like that. I do want to mention, with this kind of blends into stock photos and the content, when it comes to taking pictures of yourself and when we're thinking about looping our brand into this process, think about your audience and how people are perceiving these images when you are taking pictures and deciding what content you want or what stock photos you want to look for. For example, if you are someone that works primarily with beginners and you do a lot of beginner workshops and you do a lot of kind of level 1 classes, or maybe you're a yin teacher, taking a bunch of pictures or finding stock photos of like scorpion pose or these really advanced poses might come off as intimidating to someone who is typically like going to be engaging in your content. Or vice versa. If you work with advanced people in yoga and you work with teachers who are advanced in their practice and you're running, you know, a level 2 or 3 or whatever you want to categorize it as, a workshop for advanced yogis, or you're working on like a handstand workshop, that's a great instance to use those photos, and that will be appealing to someone like that. But you know, so just be mindful about the content you're choosing based on how people are going to be perceiving it, because your imagery and the content in your imagery and the style of your imagery is very much communicating your brand vibe and your brand tones and your values. Just a little like side note. So back to stock photos. Number 1 rule, don't go for the cheese. Don't be cheesy. Number 2, if you need something really specific, so let's say you are working on a blog post or you are trying to get a poster or a postcard made for an upcoming retreat that you have, and you really need a yogi doing handstand. Let's say it's a handstand workshop on a retreat in Mexico. Let's just like really kind of narrow the context. It's going to be very unlikely that you're going to find a free stock photo that is going to be a very specific context. So you may need to go to a paid option. And paid options are great because you can find stock photos for as little as $1, or you can find photos for $50. But if you need a very specific thing, or you have a very clear brand vibe, and a clear tone you're trying to go for, or there's a very distinct imagery that you need, paid stock photos are still a really good affordable option if you don't have a photographer or the ability to get into the location that you need. So you might be able to have a photographer, but you're not in Mexico and you really want it in this like very serene tropical location. So if you have a context or a situation like that, paid stock photos, great option. So I'm going to give you a couple of places where I go for stock photos that I pay for or that I go for clients. Number one is Stocksy. So it's stock, like a stock photo, SY, and they're a little bit more premium, but they're really good quality, and there's very little cheese factor for these photos. So great option for paid photography. A little bit more again of the premium side of things, but a really good solid option. The second one is Creative Market. So Creative Market is kind of this graphic imagery hub where you can buy different elements for a brand or for a design, and they have stock photos there, and that can be a lot less. The range is broad, but you can find more affordable options on Creative Market. And the third one is Canva. So if you use Canva and you're a fan of Canva, go Canva, love Canva. Particularly just for beginners, for people who can't necessarily afford a designer or a photographer right off the bat. Canva has paid options, and it's like $1 for a photo or something like that, which you cannot argue with because it's way cheaper than a photographer, and you're still getting a premium stock photo that is probably still pretty unique. When we get into the free stock photo sites that I'm going to list for you, you will notice when you check them out, you'll probably recognize some of them because they're free, so everyone uses them. So when you do pay for a stock option, I sound like I'm like a banker. When you do pay for stock photography, you're taking that level up where it's less likely that people will be using these as much. So it's a bit more unique to you and your brand and your business. So those are my 3 top paid options. My 3 top free stock photography. So this free stock comes in really handy when you just need like a background image for something, or a very vague and obscure image for something, but you still want it to match your brand vibe and things like that. Check out pexels.com, PEXELS.com. And that is a really great source, and it allows you to search for certain keywords, and it's all free. So literally you can find a picture and use it for free. No questions asked, no royalties, nothing. You cannot, don't go on Google and just search for an image and use it, because if that ever comes back, there are so many copyright things that you you don't want to be involved in. So don't think that don't go on Google and just search for an image and just be like, yep, that one. But these websites that I'm listing, you totally can do that. You can find an image you like, save it, and use it. So pexels.com is the first one. The second one is unsplash.com. So like UN, and then splash.com. And same thing, it's a hub for free stock images, and they're all really beautiful. They're like very, there's lots of trendy pictures in these websites, and they don't go back to that cheese factor. So that's a really good one as well. Also has a search option. And then the third one is called deathtothestockphoto.com. So deathtothestockphoto.com speaks enough in its URL itself. Zero cheese factor, and again, really great for just kind of obscure images that you don't necessarily need. It's just very, like, you could find really beautiful nature images on there that are obscure enough that they're not, if they are used elsewhere, it's like pretty vague. So check those out for free stock images. Always good to have a library of free stock imagery on there as well. And that's stock photos. So very, very good option to use stock photos that are just not cheesy for when you need them, because sometimes we just need something that we don't have access to take ourselves, or we are not in the right location or whatever. So definitely check those options out. Moving on to editing. So I'm going to list out a few editing tools that I use, or I use Photoshop, but I'm going to list a few other ones that are more user-friendly for people who maybe aren't familiar with Photoshop or don't have access to it. So obviously, number one, Photoshop. Photoshop is the power of Photoshop, and even just all of the Adobe programs that I use as a designer is beyond even me. Like, they're powerful. But there's also a big learning curve. So the other great ones that I like that are apps basically on your phone now is I don't know how to pronounce this, and maybe someone, if you're listening and you do know and you're in the comments, maybe you can help me out, but it's VSCOcam. Is there a proper way to say that? VSCOcam, just, I don't know. But VSCOcam is an app on your phone, and they have really great kind of pre-made filters, but they also have like levels you can edit, and it's just, to me, it's better than the Instagram editor and the Instagram filters. And I'm not a big filter fan. I'd rather go in and like edit the elements of the picture. But if it's easier for you to just be using filters, there are really great ones on this VSCOcam. And the one thing I will say that I say with all of my kind of brand clients, and when I talk about branding, is the key is consistency. The key is consistency. There's not enough times I can say that. And so if you are someone that loves filters, if you love filters, totally great. Use the same filters. Try not to be too variable in your filters, because it creates a disconnect. And we want consistency in our imagery, in our brand vibe, in our colors. Like, this is all what brings attention to our brand. This is all what makes it us. So consistency is key if you do use filters. So we've got VSCOcam. Obviously, the second one is Instagram filters, and they've also, as Instagram, the app has updated, they've gotten a lot better with their editing tools. So again, you can use a filter if that's like an easy one solution. Or you can go right into your editor and start editing the brightness, the contrast, which I'll talk about after this, after I list off the tools. You can go into the editor. So it is getting better. It is improving. It's just, I still prefer VSCOcam if I'm going to use an app. And the third one, which is also my top preference, is Photoshop Elements. So it's an app for your iPhone or I think it's on Android too. And Photoshop Elements is an Adobe product. It's an Adobe app. It's free. And it kind of is like Photoshop for beginners. And it's awesome. You can edit the levels. You can edit, again, the brightness, all of these things, which is really, I think they have filters as well. But it's really just, the learning curve is so much less than Photoshop. So it's a really, really good option. So those are kind of the three apps that I would use for editing. And then obviously the beast being Photoshop. So when it comes to editing your photos, let's move on to, I'm just like looking at my notes here. So let me scroll down. Let's move on to the editing tips. So I know a lot of people, if you're going into one of these apps and not using a filter, you might be like, okay, what do I need to edit to make this look the way I want it to go? So the main things that I edit when I'm just very quickly editing a photo. So say I snap a picture for my Instagram account on my iPhone. The main things I will edit are the brightness. So typically I up the brightness. Again, there's a limit. You don't want to overexpose it, and you'll be able to see what that means. It'll be like super white and kind of glary. It's almost like my wall here is a bit overexposed already, if you can see what I see. But you don't want to overexpose it, but I do up the brightness. You may want to lower the brightness if it's really bright, depending on your style and your vibe. So brightness, contrast, you can play with a little bit. I don't typically touch it too much. If anything, I up it just slightly. But again, if you lower it, it almost like mutes the picture a little bit more. So if that's the vibe you want to go for, totally looks great. You can lessen the contrast. And then the other thing I touch and play with is the saturation. So saturation, actually, I have a little handy tool open here that I can show you. This is sort of saturation. So I'm upping it right now. Look how tanned I am. So you can see this is saturation. It like puts a lot of color. Look at like the plant, lots of color. If you lower the saturation, we go towards like a black and white. So somewhere in between here, I think that's about where it was. That's the saturation, which you can play with depending on the vibrancy you want or the mutedness that you want. And then I also play with shadows and highlights. So this is usually an option. It's definitely an option on Instagram, VSCOcam and Photoshop Elements. You can up or lower the shadows. So when you up the shadows, it starts to pull the darker spaces. So like this would all kind of lighten and flatten a little bit. And I like that look because it brings it more towards a white, crisp look. Or you can lessen it and make a little bit more contrast and hard shadows, which also looks good if that's your vibe. And then highlights, same thing. You can up or lessen. And then the last one that I typically will adjust is the warmth. So the warmth of an image is, like I was mentioning before, with my bedroom office light on, it's like a yellow light. So it creates a lot of warmth in the image. You can either up that if you got really too cold of an image, you can increase the warmth to bring some like life back, especially if it's a person. You can bring some kind of like warmth into the colors, or you can take out some warmth, which I typically take out warmth because, again, for my vibe, it brings in the white crispness, brightness, but it totally depends on what your image you're starting with. So you can play with that. So those are the main ones that I touch. So brightness, contrast, saturation, shadows and highlights, and the warmth. And that's all I do to my images when I edit them. Again, if that seems like, what is she talking about? I have no idea. But if that seems like what's happening for you, what's coming up for you, you can find really great filters. It's just the consistency that's really important for that. So that's kind of the gist of tips and tricks that I have for you. I know I covered a lot. I did get one recommendation once for these live chats to have slides, which I am completely thinking about and considering. It does take a lot more work to create like the slides, but it might be nice to have like step 1, step 2, or like tip 1, tip 2. So it's something that's on my radar that I'm considering bringing into these live chats. These live chats really started as just a place for me to connect with you outside of like the Facebook group and behind my keyboard. So that's how it started. It wasn't intended to go in towards like these live training, this direction of live trainings and that kind of thing. It was more like a topic discussion, but this is all on my radar. I'm thinking about it. If it's something you think is beneficial, you can for sure reach out and let me know. But I know I covered kind of like the tips very quickly. You have the replay, and if you were taking notes, that's awesome. But again, if you have any questions at all, again, I think this is where it is. This is like the chat box that you can totally drop them in. And I think we have a question. Yes, okay. So we have a question. Angel says, will this be recorded and replayed? I can't connect from my phone. Absolutely recorded. Absolutely, you will get the replay. It will be sent to your inbox probably a couple hours after we're done here. And I always upload these to YouTube, to my YouTube channel. So if you go to youryogabrand.com/live-chats, that's where all of the replays of these are there. So any topic you missed in the past, they're all there. Typically, most of them are. But yeah, again, it's just nice to connect in real time. So answered that. Perfect. If you have questions too, there's like this question feature at the bottom, which is also a lovely place and a lovely feature of this platform. There's question box down there. But if you have any questions, please let me know in the Facebook group too. Tag me. I'm almost always hanging out there. If you're watching the replay, that's where I'll be. So I hope that there was some good kind of tips in here. If there's even not everything, you've got a few little tidbits to just improve the quality, because ultimately, like I said, imagery is the captivator. Imagery is what draws people to something. We see we're very visual beings. And so we see something and we're like, what's that? And then we explore for more. So that's where the text comes in. So imagery is the captivator, text is informational, and text is like that step further. So first, step 1, we see something, we make a decision, yes or no, and then we explore deeper. So it is important to start thinking about how we're communicating and what we're communicating with our audience with our text, with our images, and specifically the content too. So quality and content are crucial to what we're saying. What our images, we say a picture's worth 1,000 words. What are those words that you're saying through your pictures? So start thinking about things like that. And again, you know where to find me. And I do want to mention too, one thing for housekeeping is that I'm working on a yoga resource library. So if you've been on my design website, hellofunction.com ever, you'll see that there's a library where any of my subscribers, they get access to this library. It's a password protected library that has tons of resources. I'm now working on the same, which is really exciting, for youryogabrand.com. And we'll have a library there that resources will be added to ongoing. And so just look out for that announcement in the group or on via email if you're on my list. And stay tuned, because that'll be, I think, a really exciting way for us to for me at least, to keep sharing resources with you and keep adding them, like having somewhere to add them that they're all in one place. So that'll be coming soon, so stay tuned. Otherwise, I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful day. I'm just checking. No more questions? Okay, perfect. Have a great day, and I will see you hopefully in February for our live chat with more details on that coming soon. All right. Have a good one. Mwah.